Hello and welcome to our tutorial video for the Pagonia Editor. My name is Katharina and I'm the social media designer here at Envision. Together with our QA tester Chris, we will show you how to create a detailed custom map in the Pagonia Editor. This how-to video is for everyone who does not shy away when things get a little bit more technical. So for everyone who always wanted to see the details of our in-house map generation tools, this is definitely for you. In this guide, we will show you how to create a map step by step. And if you want to know how to access the Pagonia editor, please check our wiki page for more details. So without further ado, let's start creating our first map.
Okay, that's right. So we have the editor already open. And to create maps, we first have to create packages. And inside of these packages, we can create however many maps we want. So let's go on the top, create empty package. Let's name it editor showcase and create. And then inside of that, we create our first map. And after a short loading time, we are presented with the first step of the generation process. It's important to note that the Pagonia map editor is quite different to other editors because it guides you through the generation process in 17 steps. Each step has its own purpose and generates a specific part of the map. And before we start editing the first step, I want to show you the interface of it. Let's start on the top. Here we have a lot of different filters that can show and hide certain aspect of the game. For example, like trees or NPC factions or treasures that you will have to activate and deactivate in the according steps. On the left side, you will have your tools. In the first step, it's the tool for the ocean painting, for example. On the bottom, very important are our steps. As I said, each step represents a specific step in the generation process, and it's important that we follow these steps in the order that it's presented here. Here on the right top, we have our hierarchy. Here are the contents of our map. For the first step, it starts with just the island and our typical inputs that we might already know from the current map editor in the game, map generator. Here we have settings like the island size, the landing party, all the settings you might be familiar with that also define each of the steps, how it will be generated. So then let's start with the first step. This is where we will use the ocean tool up here. And we can just use it to paint and to add and remove land, basically. So we can add like any shape we want. It is just important that the island consists of one piece and not of multiple islands. And if we want to have like a big lake in the middle of the island, that's also not possible because that's ocean. It's differentiated between oceans and lakes, and the lakes will be painted in the next steps. I'm quite happy with that shape, so let's go to the next one.
Just a quick question. So can you go back to a previous step once you finished one?
Yes. If I now decide that I'm not happy with the shape, I can go back to, for example, for the island step, and I can remove this chunk of the island. And then I can go back to my landscaping step. And now you will see that the NPC faction that we already created is moved. It will already do that. And if there are bigger complications, it will ask you to choose which version you want to have. All right, in this step, we will define basically the blockers and shapes of our map. We should enable the show half edges filter to see the hexes that our map consists of. And you can already see here are these little edges that are highlighted, and these edges represent cliffs. And if we want to define the cliff, we can simply click on one side to let it point to this side. And the arrow always shows the lower side of the cliff. And this will, in a later step, define how high the map will be and where obstacles are. as well as the cliffs. You can also paint the lakes that I mentioned before. You just pick the tool and then paint it however you like. Okay, maybe a little smaller. We can also paint mountains here. That will also greatly define the shape of our island in terms of height, which is all generated in a later step. But it's wise that we define it right now. And we can also place plateau. Those are these rocky areas that you might be familiar with from the map generation. All right, then let's head to the next step, sediments. This is where we will paint our sediments of the map, for example, dry grass or fertile grass or swampy areas. This is all defined here. We have on the left side our sediment painter, and we can just pick whatever sediment we want to paint. And then, as we already know it, paint the area.
So if I wanted to, can I make a whole map with only grass?
Yes, that's totally possible, but you will have to think about the gameplay implications. Because on a map with only grass, the map generator doesn't have that much space to place resources like coal or stone, which are required to be placed on rocky areas. Then it will force some of the rocky areas to make it work, so the player can actually win the map. So in this step, the generation will place the animals, POIs, and enemies. Let's just activate the filters for it. And now we can see we have POIs here, that if we want, with the move tool, we could already move to a different location. For example, back here. Or we have enemy camps, but I want them over here and over here. And I could do this with all the camps. I can also select them. For example, the deer den, it's a deer spawner. And then I can change here what I want to spawn here. We have rabbits, boars, and deer in the game, and you can just choose them as you like. Important for those is that they always have a lot of forest in the area, because animals need forests to spawn. And if we zoom in and enable the trees, we can already see, yes, they have forest nearby, so it's possible for them to spawn. It's also possible if the player plants forest, but of course we want it to be there from the start on. So in the step for plants, it's quite similar to the previous step. We just enable our plants filter and deactivate the others. And now we can see all the plant deposits that are placed. For example, this one I selected here has 24 wild flags. We can change that if we like, and we can change the amount if we like, and we can move it wherever we want with the move tool. For example, over here, and done. That's basically it. And let's move to the next one. All right, now we are here in our step for treasures. Let's disable the other filters. So we will see green and orange treasures. Green indicates a visible treasure, and orange is an invisible treasure. So it's completely hidden underground, and the green ones will have ruins on top. That indicates, okay, here you should search with the treasure hunter. So if I select it, I will have it here in my hierarchy. I'll have my treasures and all the contents. If I like, I can add or remove the treasure content. Let's just add an X, for example. Then go back at it again. And here I can set the amount of it. For example, I want 6 X's in this treasure. If I want to link these treasures, these green lines mean there is a treasure map inside of this treasure that leads to this treasure. We can also see over here, here's a treasure without any link, so it would be impossible for the player to find it unless the treasure map is contained in an objective reward or in a trade. We can also create a completely new one. All right, I have my new treasure here. I want it to be an hidden treasure. And now I want this treasure to contain a treasure map. I add it here, add treasure. Then I will search for treasure map. And then inside the treasure map, I will put in the index of it. So for -1, I can see here the link changes with the number I input. And I have to input 6 for the 6th treasure here. So if I now find this treasure map inside of it and decipher it, I will find this treasure location with a red X on the minimap. Let's hide them again and go to the next map for artifacts. Oh, I see there's an error message here now. This tells us there's an error from the previous checkpoint, so we will have to recheck the inputs we made there. Just go back, and I think I already know what it is. Yeah, over here, the new treasure we created doesn't contain any contents, and we can't have treasures without treasure, right? So let's add just anything to it. A backpack is enough. Maybe 8, and now to the next step, and now everything works. Great. So in this step, artifacts, the artifacts we can define previously will be spread over to the to all the treasures we have. So you can see now they're added Phoenix Quill and the Crystal Ball to this one. And if we want to change those, we can go back here to treasure, here in the artifacts, and this is all the artifacts that will be placed on the map. And this is basically all there is to the artifact step. Let's go right over to mines. So for the underground, we want to disable our treasures and enable the treasure filter and switch to the underground filter if we like. Here we can switch back and forth for underground and overground deposits. And we can also select them in the hierarchy, and then we can change what they should contain. All right, that's basically it for mines. Let's go to balance. Right here we have a error that tells us there isn't free space for fish, but we can ignore that because there are a lot of other fish on the map. Now we are here in balance. This is the step where it really gets interesting with the detail of the map, because now is the step where it all gets divided into triangles and gives us much more control about the precise positions of our deposit. For example, in the previous step, we could only move it per hex, but now we can move it really precise.
Why do we have a balancing step right here in the middle?
Yeah, the balancing step will also ensure that the player has all necessary resources on the map, and everything that wasn't spawned yet is spawned now. For example, in the starting area, it will place all necessary deposits like flux and berries that the player needs to have their first progress. For example, the players always needs wood deposits to start building the first buildings. And this step makes sure it's all available. All right, let's go to the next step, height. So in this step, the editor will generate the third dimension for our map. So it's the first time we actually see our map in 3D with all the cliffs and mountain that we have painted earlier. For example, you can also see that the buildable areas, if we toggle it on and off, will stay rather flat compared to other areas of the map. And right here, we can also move things around if we want in 3D.
Can you control the heights directly?
No, we can't directly control the heights. We can only control it via the landscape features like the cliffs and the mountains. As you can see, they are much taller, and the cliffs always add a little bit more of height. And in general, the map will be higher the more it goes inland, and lower when it encounters a lake, for example. But yeah, there are no like brushes or similar tools from other editors. All right, but there's nothing much to do than moving things around. So I'm going to the next step, fine-tuning. And this step is just fine-tuning, as the name says, the mesh of the island. If we go back and forth, you can see how the mesh is refined. And again, like in the step with height, I can fine-tune the position of objects if I like. But there's nothing much to do here. But it is another nice opportunity to save, because as you know, it's a beta and we want to save our work in case of a crash. Then let's go to the next step, deposits. So as we can see here, there's a warning that some of the deposits for fish and mushrooms couldn't be placed, but those are just a few, so I'm going to ignore them. If I wanted, I would go back and search for them with the coordinates here. All right, now we are in deposits. It's the first step where it actually looks like the game that you are familiar with. And in this step, all the deposits that were previously just cubes and chunks on the map are now really rendered as objects in the game world. Also, the terrain is completely done now. And we can switch to the 3D view to see that all, to the 2D view, I mean, and see that all the objects are now 1 by 1 squares. And they all have blocking now. And in the 3D view, we can also enable the blocking view. So we can see the blocking of objects when we place and edit the position of objects. To do that, we can just select them and press 1, 2, or 3 to access our tools, and then we can move them around. It's nice to mention that when moving on the Y and X axis, the objects will snap to the ground. And when holding Alt, I can simply duplicate objects and add as many as I like. I can also, in the properties, change the amount of items and do whatever I like with it. All right, since I don't want to move anything more around here, I will go to the next step for buildings. So let's quickly save our progress again.
Can you show how the entire island looks at this point?
Yes, we can zoom out a lot. And this also makes it easier to navigate the island, because over here there are the POIs that have been generated now in this step. In this step, all the buildings, that means POIs, enemy camps, are generated, and I can move them. And the difference here from the deposit is that the buildings will consider all the deposits I have placed when they are placed in the map. So they are not overwriting any bushes or trees that I've placed. And if I want to move something, I can also simply do that with the move tool. I can just move them around, the height, the rotation, whatever I like. If I want to undo it, I can just do that. It's recommended that we don't move the POIs too much, because the map generation, the terrain, will always make sure there's a little bit of space around it. So it makes sure that it's accessible via road. But other buildings can be placed completely freely without any issues. Considering, of course, the blocking that we can enable and disable whenever we like. And yeah, that's it for the step of buildings. And now we go over to the step for villages. All right, here's another list of deposits that couldn't be placed. But we can ignore them too. And in this step, the villages buildings are placed. We have a village over here. And now you can see it's automatically generated with all its buildings that it needs for its economy. If you have a smaller village, you will probably only see the market center and some market storages in order for it to work in regards of objectives. And we also can't see the roads and the borders here because it's not rendered. So this step props, it still looks the same as before, but there is a small detail, or many details to be exact, and that is that now props are placed. And props mean things like lily pads, like these little plants, little stones, and all these little decorative objects that I can, of course, move around, but I can place a bush. Easy. So in the props and other steps, we differentiate between land prop and water prop. And that only means that if we place, for example, a bush, then as a land prop, it will snap to the land. Now it's underwater, and now will come up. And as a water prop, it will snap to the ocean. This also works with lakes and allows us really lazy placement of the items because it's just simply snapping to the surface that we want. This is where some of the terrain shaping will be finalized, and there's nothing much to do here, so we can go to final step, and then our map is basically finished. We could now launch the map with our little game icon over here and play it for ourselves. Okay, so that is basically it for the generation process of our editor. I hope you have a better understanding of the steps and how everything works. And yeah, have fun creating maps.
Thank you, Chris, for guiding us through the process. I really can't wait to play the map we've created today. I really hope this helps for you people outside, to have a guide and try the Pagonia editor yourself. Also, if you want to look things up, we have a step-by-step guide in our official wiki. And if you want to join our community and join the discussions, you're always more than welcome to join our Discord channel. So thank you so much for watching and see you in Pagonia.
See you. Bye.
Take up the tools, pioneers. There's still so much to do.